Art direction. So art direction is the overall look of the product or film. In our case, uh, or it could be the game. Could be any number. Usually, you typically think of it more in the entertainment industry. But the idea is you want to have some sort of strong, cohesive style that is overarching the entire production. Okay, so typically what we'll often have is that you'll have a main art director, and that person's style basically everybody else tries to match. And then whatever she makes, everybody else will try to make sure their stuff also matches that, and that way there's a consistency across the entirety of it. You don't want to have things that just look wildly different from one to another one. I mean, there's times where like you'll see that stylistically, but even when they do that, there's still some element of it that makes it harmonize, either through color scheme or texture or something. So, for an example, I had a film in the Tribeca Film Festival that I worked on. It wasn't my original idea. In 2018, which is a while now. There was 8 films that got accepted. I could only find 6 of them that I could find like clips of them too. But mine's the worst one. It's this one right here. The Velvet Underground played it in my high school. But there were some big names like Pixar and Leica animators worked on this one. Cartoon Saloon, they're a really big one. They did like Breadwinner or Secret of Kells or well, they've done a bunch of like basically feature length animations. One neat one is if you look at this one, it's not particularly my favorite one, but this is actually done in Adobe Animate, and ours is actually mostly done in After Effects, which are those things that we teach at Cecil. So, anyway, what you're going to notice is that they will have a style that basically the entire production will try to match, right? So it's cohesive. Just like when you have when you're working in graphic design or you have page design, you're going to try and make sure that all the elements match. So a big thing to think about when you have style, it's not what you're drawing, but it's how you're drawing it. So what I mean by that is that I'll have students and they'll be like, oh, my style is I draw one eye bigger than the other. That's not a style. That's just a thing that you do. Or like, oh, I always draw characters with, this hat or something. That's just something you're throwing on. It's not actually a stylistic element. It's more like the process that you use in order to get to that final product, and the general quality of the image that you're making. So you can see these are all cones, right? But they're all kind of done in a different way. So it results in a different style in the end. So I guess what I'm getting at is you really want to be careful that you're not just repeating elements over and over and over again, because that's not really a stylistic thing. You should be able to have a variety of designs, but that seem cohesive. A really good example actually is like, have you ever seen like the Gorillas? I like that one as a good example just because the style I thought was a really good Gorillas, like the band. But their whole thing is they have like animated characters that represent all the players. But if you look, you'll see like one character, they all are cohesive, but they actually don't draw the same eyes. The noses look different. They actually all like the designs are actually significantly different for each one of them, as opposed to just like, oh, all the characters have the same eyes. Even in most TV shows and movies, you'll see that they kind of do have repeating elements, which is not good. So one of the things I want you to be wary of is, oh, I got to get the pictures here. Hang on one second. All right, now I got those pictures back in there. Or I got some pictures. I don't remember what I had in there before. Okay, so one of the things you have to be wary about is that you're going to develop a style. And a lot of what ends up happening is I have students that are very into like anime, especially anime, but they might be big into Disney or Looney Tunes or, whatever, some specific kind of product that's out there. And what they end up doing is initially they end up copying it. And that's how most of us learn. I drew a lot of like Ninja Turtles and X-Men and stuff like that. And that's what got me interested in it. And it's good to be inspired. I mean, that's why you're probably in the fields that you're in, because you enjoyed them and then you wanted to mimic them. But what we have to do is be careful that you aren't just absolutely copying them, because that makes you less valuable, because all you're really doing is making something that a bunch of other people can also make. You want them to come to you for your specific thing. So, but what I do want to say is it's fine to be influenced and even incorporate it somewhat into your style. I mean, it's inevitable. And you'll see examples of this professionally. So everybody knows Tim Burton. Tim Burton's got a very strong style, right? It's got that kind of gothic, kind of strong shapes, but usually a lot of like pencil thin limbs and things. His influence, he's heavily influenced by Edward Gorey. You can look him up. You can see like, oh wow, that's quite the it's quite the influence. There's definitely a strong influence from that guy's style, and he has some pretty grim stuff, and some of his stuff's very funny. He was an illustrator. I forget when he lived or whatever. But he was one of the first people to come out as asexual, which I thought was also interesting. It was like back in the time when people didn't do that. So, but his work is amazing. I would highly suggest seeing it. Really, really great. And anyway, Tim Burton is highly influenced by him. And if you look at the two, you will see clearly. Now that being said, he does move from him, but he's definitely enjoys his style and incorporates it into his own. Another one that's a good example is Cars. So Cars, the John Lasseter used to be like the Disney of Pixar for a while, and then he left. But he I think he directed Cars. It was his story and his vision and everything. But if you look at Cars, it's heavily influenced from Little Blue Coupe, which you probably haven't seen that. It's a short animated film by Disney. Lasseter loved Disney, and he copied all the stuff. And you can definitely see, in general, an influence of Disney on Pixar, right? I mean, I don't think that's too hard to say. And Lasseter was the major producer and kind of head of the art side of things, not the technology side. So, and a really good example, like here directly, is that most of the time when you would see caricatures of cars, typically they use the headlights as the eyes, right? You'll notice that this one uses the windshield, which is actually uses there. And he, even if you look at behind the scenes, he mentions it somewhere. So it's fine to be influenced by stuff, but you just want to make sure that you are going beyond that you're incorporating yourself into it. Now, there's other examples of this as well. So you guys, hopefully you know The Last Airbender. It's a really great series. I think Netflix is making a whole bunch of new stuff, so I don't know what's going on with that. But The Last Airbender obviously is sort of influenced by anime, and there's a whole style from that. And a lot of the anime style can kind of find its roots back to Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy. So he did a bunch of work, kind of a major animator. And Astro Boy is sort of, and you can definitely see how like these are sort of influenced from each other. But what you might not know is that Astro Boy is actually based off of Grim Natwick's Betty Boop. And you might not have like seen that before, but now that you've seen it, you see it, right? And this is great though, because you have one artist influencing another artist and then influences another artist. And I just think it's interesting because you have an American artist influencing a Japanese artist that then influences back in America again. So it went full circle. Like I said, but you can see each one's an iteration, each one's different, but they definitely borrow, aspects of each other. So one of the things that's going to happen is it's hard to force style, if you will. Try to utilize style, but you innately have a style just as you draw. Because anytime, like if I put a teddy bear in front of you and I ask you to draw it, you might draw it and you might make it as photorealistic as you can possibly make it. However, because you made it, it is your style, right? You will draw it differently than anybody else in the world. And so you innately have a style. Might not be super distinct or maybe even might not even be appealing, but you do have a style. What I would suggest is that you just keep working, and then eventually you'll find that you will develop a style more and more. So I personally do not have a super strong style, but there's advantages to having them and not having them. So if you can adapt, that's a very useful skill, because obviously if you're working in a large production, you need to be able to follow the art director and follow whatever he or she wants you to make, right? So you don't want to be like, oh, I only draw a bunny this specific way. That's not good. However, for example, Tim Burton. Do you know what Tim Burton where he worked to start? Disney. And you might not think that this looks like a Disney style, but the reason why they hired him is that he wasn't a particularly good animator, but they thought he had a really strong artistic style, and they could see that obviously he had skill. So they end up hiring him. In fact, the Nightmare Before Christmas, probably his most famous work, that's actually a Disney movie. But you'll notice you never, especially in the early stuff, you never see anything with it. And I think because they were like, I don't know about this. Afterwards, now they all like, oh yeah, it's ours. But initially, I think there was a little bit of fear because obviously it doesn't really kind of fit their brand. But he was only hired because of his style. And so to have a style is really good because if I want what you make, the only way I can get it is from you. But if you're making a generic style, I can get that from a million people, and it's less valuable. It makes you less likely to be hired. Makes you get paid less, right? You stand out less. There's a lot of different reasons for it. Okay, so I love this. I don't know why I put this drawing in here, but my daughter. This is when. God, how old was she? She was little. I'm gonna say like 3 or 4. And she wrote, "I can see the kitten. What up, kitten?" And what I loved about it, she drew the front of it and she drew the back. You could see, which I thought that was pretty good. Anyway, so try to think about style. The best way to do it is just like how you get better at anything is just do it a lot, and then eventually you'll start to see you'll start making some ground.